Yeah, so just a really brief overview of this. We've heard a lot already yesterday and today about the just vast amount of carbon that is held in the boreal forest ecosystems and projected changes in fire regimes in the North American boreal forests. So my project is investigating the effect of burning on soil microbial community composition and the persistence of this effect 5 weeks after burning. We are also interested in identifying specific microbial traits that may confer an advantage to bacteria in the post-fire environment. So essentially, we collected soil cores and burned them in the lab. And I'm just going to do a quick rundown of our results. We found that at higher burn temperatures, we saw higher rates of mass loss that was expected, decrease in carbon to nitrogen ratios, and an increase in soil pH. Higher temperature burns also resulted in lower respiration rates in the incubations post-burn, as well as a decrease in the fractional size of the fast carbon pool and a shift in microbial community composition. And then briefly, we identified a decrease in the mean sample RNA to DNA gene ratios at higher temperature burns, an increase in the bacterial class bacilli, which are known spore-forming bacteria, and a shift in the gene copy number in our samples with burning. So just the broad takeaways are that we do see an effect of burning on my soil microbial community, and this effect of burning persists for time since burn, which is likely driven by changes in carbon substrates and changes in soil pH and microbial mortality. And we saw an increase in the relative abundance of spore formation, which suggests that spore formation may confer a fire survival advantage. That is the very brief rundown.
All right, thank you very much. That's cool, the spore forming component. Any questions out here in the audience?
How much of a difference do you see in the community composition between or among the different forest types that you looked at?
Yeah, that's a really good question. When you run like a permanova, if you're familiar with that, the different vegetation types, so we had spruce, aspen, and jack pine, they drive some of the variability in community composition, but a much higher percentage of the variability is driven by pH, soil texture, and then burning. So honestly, not as much as I expected. But I think also some of the vegetation, the difference in vegetation is captured in the soil texture component, because I guess just the vegetation that you see at like a very peaty soil is different than when you see on like a acidic acid soil where you've got a bunch of jack pine.
Melissa, how are we doing on time?
We're at 3:30, so a minute and a half.
Okay, one more question. Dana, I'm curious to know, so you saw an increase in spore forming bacteria types. Was that after the incubation or was it just after the burning?
Yeah, the biggest effect is immediately after the burning. And we see with some of the Bacillus species, a continued increase in relative abundance.
Plus, you also showed it's both the low intensity wildfires as well, right?
Yes.
So both low intensity wildfires and low intensity harvests are giving rise to that rise in carbon sequestration.
Your question is about, sorry? It's a different intensity. The intensity is also in terms of standing volume. harvest from the sun.
Mm-hmm. Okay, are there any questions on the chat? Yes, I see hand raised. Xanthe, please go ahead.
My screen. Excellent. So I might try and put this center view. Can you see my notes or can you just see my poster?
Just the poster.
Excellent. All right. So my name is Alexis. I'm going to be talking about plant recovery and wildlife return to the boreal forest after fire. So we know that climate change is causing more and larger fires to burn in boreal North America. I wanted to examine how this is likely to impact boreal vegetation over time and the wildlife that rely on this vegetation for food. In order to address this, I and a variety of other researchers visited burn sites of a range of different ages in the Northwest Territories of Canada and recorded what was growing in each, along with a variety of environmental information such as soil moisture class. This gave us data on what was growing at 1-year-old sites versus what was growing on 100-year-old sites and several ages in between. Our analysis of this data indicated that time after fire has a significant influence on both full plant community and several of the individual plant species that we looked at over at least the first 100 years post-fire. However, it's not alone, as nearly all the other environmental variables that we looked at also had a significant influence on vegetation community, particularly soil moisture. We also found that vegetation recovery patterns can vary greatly by species and are often regulated by how wet a site is. For example, black spruce recovers much more quickly on wet sites than on dry sites. If we consider what this means for wildlife, our predictions of plant recovery and wildlife forage generally indicate that the amount of food on site will increase over time. However, given the large number of variables that can influence habitat selection, forage projections alone may not be enough to predict when animals such as moose or caribou are likely to use burned areas. However, they are a valuable piece of the puzzle.
Thank you. We have some questions.
Can I ask a question? This is Jill.
Yeah.
Hello.
Alexis, can you zoom in on your forage graphs? They look sort of interesting.
Yes.
And I'm wondering if you could just explicitly talk about the different animal responses that you're sort of projecting, or forage availability responses to the different successional ages. Can you just walk us through that?
These are my graphs. I'm not studying forage specifically, or I'm not studying animal specifically. I don't have any animal data. So effectively what we did is we made linear models showing vegetation recovery over time for a bunch of different forage species. And then we just plunked them all on a single graph. So with caribou, we know that they eat reindeer lichen, willow, cranberry, birch, aster, and blueberry. So we've put them on a single graph. And that has indicated that, you can see there's different patterns, but generally forage appears to increase over time. However, when you look at these gray bars are timelines of top habitat use of burn sites from the literature. We can see that they don't always correspond with where forage is the most common. So it's pretty good for caribou, but with moose, it looks like forage would be more common later on. However, moose are using these younger areas more, which is why we think that habitat selection has a lot of things going on other than forage.
Okay, like moose, of course, are limited by what they can reach. And so willow and birch can outgrow their access. So did you take into account the stature of the vegetation at all?
Our analysis, we didn't. However, we did talk a lot about why we might see the patterns we did. And yes, certainly plants getting too tall is one of the reasons that we might see that moose isn't eating as much or isn't here as much. And that's especially relevant for snowshoe hare as well, because they're much smaller.
Great, thanks.
Thank you.
We're at 5 minutes already.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay,
Thanks for
so
listening.
next we have, let's see, Tatiana Kopoteva, the dynamics of the functioning of large wooded peat bogs during post-wildfire recovery on the Middle Amur lowland.
So, this is the poster.
Victoria, we can see your poster, but you can.
Do you see the poster?
Yeah.
Yes?
Yes, but there. There is a lot of background noise, Victoria.
Huh?
There is a lot of noise coming out of your microphone. Now it's good. So now you can start talking. Please go ahead with your presentation, Victoria.
So, we compare annual production, stock of plant matter of shrubgrass and mostly on a biome area and the ambient ones.
Victoria, we can't hear you. There is a background noise coming from your side. So maybe if you can work on fixing the background noise, and maybe we can switch your presentation with the next one so that you can, I don't know what the background noise is, but just stop it. And then what do you think, Michelle? Or
Okay, let's move on to the next presentation and then we'll return to Victoria.
Yeah, I work with her
at the end. Okay, so next is Caius Ribeiro Camara, surface and crown fire effects on soil respiration in a boreal forest of Western Canada.
Hello, so can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
Okay, and you can see my screen. You can see, okay, right, thanks. So in this study, we wanted to know how soil respiration differs between forests burned by crown fires and forests burned by surface fires. Our study took place at the Fort Providence Wildfire Experimental Site in the Northwest Territories, Canada, in August 2018. And we measured soil respiration using portable dark chambers placed on collars that were sitting on the top of the forest floor. So we did not remove the ground vegetation when it was present. Therefore, our soil CO2 effluxes include autotrophic foliar respiration, let's say. We also collected soil samples from the humus layer and the mineral layer at 5 centimeters depth. Then we incubated those samples to obtain soil heterotrophic respiration. And our autotrophic respiration was basically the difference between the chamber soil surface CO2 flux and the heterotrophic respiration from the incubation samples. Now moving to results, I'll go back here, hope it's still working. We noticed on site, of course, that the crown fires had killed all the trees, so causing stand mortality, both in spruce dominated sites, black spruce, and in pine dominated sites. And the interesting or more curious to us was to see that surface fires, 2 of the 3 that we studied, also caused stand mortality. We saw this 1 year and 3 years after fire. And this site that was united in 2018 when we were there, to this day, point in time in 2021, the trees have not died. So it was maybe the only one that was not stand replacing. And regarding soil respiration, so I have this graph with the values of soil respiration on the y-axis. And here you can see in orange the values of the average from crown fire, and the yellow from surface fire. The solid bars are autotrophic respiration, and the dashed bars are heterotrophic respiration. So we noticed that 1 and 2 years after fire in spruce dominated sites, there was a significant decrease in autotrophic respiration, which is expected and I guess seen most often. And for some reason, we didn't detect a significant difference in after crown fires in pine dominated sites. But the interesting part for us was this little trend that we noticed that autotrophic respiration seems to decrease with time after fire, after surface fires, but it only became significant 3 years after fire. So we are kind of assuming that, or we believe that it's possible that this is related to the delayed mortality caused by surface fires comparing to crown fires that straight away killed trees. And moving to the soil heterotrophic respiration, the highlight of our results is that we observed an increase in soil heterotrophic respiration in the site burned in 2018. So our measurements were performed 1 hour after the fire, and then 2 on the second and on the third day after fire. So there was this little pulse of soil heterotrophic respiration. And we also hypothesized that it has to do with an interaction between the ash deposition and the wetting performed to suppress the fire. And this is assuming that the fire in 2018 was not severe enough. Well, the burn severity on the soil was not high. So the microbes were able to be stimulated by this labile carbon and nutrients from the ash deposition. So if I'm still on time, I can say our conclusion that our results should suggest that both fire types can substantially alter the soil carbon fluxes in the short, medium term, either through change in the vegetation or the soil environment. Thank you.
Thank you.
We probably have time for one question. Anyone has a question?
I have a question. With your respiration figure, did you measure control just at year 0, or did you measure it every year? And if you measured at just year 0, do you think that changes in just annual variability in temperature and precipitation could be driving any of the changes you see in respiration?
Yes, definitely. This was like a campaign study, so we were there for 6-7 days. And although it's like the same area, it's a 6 square kilometer area, I guess quite small. And each of this bar represents one site. They have all been burned but before the last one, by the same fire that the control areas were. But I think, like I said, probably there are other factors. Let's not say probably, but there is a high chance because it is how to say, time substituted by space kind of experiment. So there is always that chance. I hope he answered your question.
Right. Thank you very much. Let's see, let's move on to Christopher Smith, assessing burn severity using remote sensing methods in the Alaskan boreal forest.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you guys if you could share my screen or share the poster.
Yes, I think I can do that. Yes. Only now I have to share my screen.
Sorry about that.
No problem. I'm just slow. Share screen. Okay. Can you guys see that?
Yeah, so I'll get started here. So burn severity is the amount of ecological change caused by a fire and is measured by parameters such as plant mortality, char height, and changes to the soil. And in our research, we had two main goals. The first one was determine which remote sensing method is best for assessing burn severity. And the second one was determine if there was a relationship between burn severity and environmental factors such as slope, aspect, and terrain. And remote sensing data and techniques have improved significantly in recent years, and we want to determine what techniques are best for creating burn severity maps, and which requires gathering both satellite and field data. And for burn severity assessments to be accurate, you need to collect field data within an 18 to 24 month window after a fire, meaning that in Alaska, you really only have one summer to collect field data. And most fires that occur are going to be in difficult terrain with little to no road or trail access. But in 2019 in Fairbanks, we had two fires that were very close that also provided trail access, and those were the Shovel and Nugget Creek fires. And the Shovel and Nugget Creek fires enabled us to study burn severity on the ground as well as from satellite data. And we gathered data using the composite burn index, which is commonly used method to conduct ground-based burn severity assessments. And we were able to collect 28 plots at Nugget Creek and 52 plots at Shovel Creek, and the data collected from these points were used to help train image classifiers to assess the accuracy of burn severity maps and determine the relationship between burn severity and environmental factors. We created our burn severity maps using Sentinel-2 multispectral satellite imagery of the burn scars and overlaid on the 2-meter Arctic DEM digital elevation model for topography. And from this imagery, we created burn severity maps using remote sensing methods, including machine learning classifiers, a random forest and support vector machine, traditionally used spectral indices such as normalized burn ratio and normalized difference vegetation index, and created difference indices, which use pre and post fire images of the before mentioned indices and are subtracted from each other to get the amount of change caused by the fire. At Shovel Creek, our burn severity best performing product was the machine learning classifier's random forest and support vector machine that had an 83% accuracy, while at Nugget Creek, our best performing product was NDVI with a 96% accuracy. And this showed that both machine learning classifiers and spectral indices can create highly accurate burn severity maps when coupled with adequate field data. We also found that burn severity's relationship with environmental factors such as slope and aspect is site dependent. And based on these results, further research is needed to determine what factors lead to higher burn severity in the boreal forest. So thank you, and I can take any questions that anyone has.
Good. Looks like Jill has her hand raised, and then Emily.
Chris, this is interesting. So it just based on a quick your summary of your poster, it almost seems like there is no one best way to characterize burn severity. Is that a true take-home message?
Yeah, so I think the big take-home message is that what we think happened is that we were able to get more field data collected at Shovel Creek, and therefore we were able to train our machine learning classifiers a lot better than we were able to at Nugget Creek, and that kind of played a role into how well the classifier performed. So it's going to kind of depend on how much field data you can gather is going to kind of dictate how well these different burn severity maps will perform.
Okay, so then I'm hearing a little bit that almost if you want to trust your classification statistics, you need more field samples. But if you want to get a high number, less field samples is better because you got very high R² from your Nugget Creek.
Yeah, and I think the thing is, like I said, some of these sites are very hard to access. So we actually weren't able to access Nugget Creek for almost all of last summer because of a bear carcass or a moose carcass attracting bears to the area. So we weren't even allowed out there. But the advantage of like the spectral indices is they're quick to calculate, and you don't have to do any kind of training data for an input.
Thank you.
Yep.
Emily, question.
Yeah, I like your poster. I was just curious about why you chose to use NDVI as your vegetation indice.
Yeah, so that was based off of what was used previously in Alaska. So I think it was in 2005, a study used NDVI, and that was one of the better performing products. It was obviously, didn't do as well as NBR, but it's just also just like common because the NDVI, the advantage is it's measuring vegetation health. So an area of high burn severity is probably not going to have a lot of vegetation coming back, while an area of lower burn severity is going to have healthier vegetation and therefore have a higher value in the NDVI. And we just wanted to see if that was a method that we could use, and it proved to be very accurate at the Nugget Creek site.
Melissa, how
All right, we're just at 5 minutes.
Okay, great. Maybe the other questions out there you can ask Chris later in the session when we have open time. Okay,
Thank you guys for the questions.
I'm going to stop share here. And our next speaker is Brian Isbicki. Legacy soil organic matter influences carbon and nitrogen cycling during post-fire recovery.
We can see your poster, Ryan.
We can't hear you though.
But yeah.
Oh,
we could earlier though. So maybe
wait,
you're on mute.
Ah, there we go.
Oh, there we go.
Okay.
You got my poster?
Yeah. If you could zoom in, maybe just a tiny bit.
Too much?
Thank you. That's all.
Is that better? Okay, so legacy soil organic matter is the idea that over multiple fires, carbon and nitrogen accumulate in the soil organic layer by escaping combustion and are a net sink to the atmosphere. But with increased fire activity, these accumulated layers could combust and make boreal forest a net source to the atmosphere. But we also don't know the other functions that legacy soil organic matter plays in the ecosystem, especially over the inter-fire interval, so a single fire return interval. So we asked, how does legacy soil organic matter age impact decomposition via soil respiration? And how does it impact nitrogen availability via net nitrogen mineralization? We expected that older soil would have less soil respiration and greater net nitrogen mineralization because of soil characteristics associated with soil age. So we collected soil from 7 fire scars in the Northwest Territories in 2015 after the record fire year in 2014. And with those soils, we performed a 90-day laboratory incubation. We tested our hypotheses with linear mixed effects models and found that older soil had lower soil respiration and more net nitrogen mineralization, primarily because of microbial activity in the soil profile. So we found legacy soil organic matter in 95% of our soil profiles. And the ages of those soils range from 8 to several centuries. So our findings suggest that legacy soil organic matter age contributes to decomposition and nitrogen availability, and that it has implications for ecosystem carbon balance and plant productivity. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we have time for some questions. Melissa, is that right?
Yeah, we have 3 minutes question.
Okay.
I have a question for you, Brian. Did you look at all into how soil moisture is affecting the accumulation of legacy carbon? Because I would imagine that could be playing a role in the potential combustion of legacy carbon. I know you collected across a variety of plots.
Yeah, so we collected across all the soil moisture classes that weren't completely combusted. And actually soil moisture didn't impact, so it didn't impact soil respiration or nitrogen mineralization. It does impact, like the severity does impact like the initial combustion when the fire is moving through the forest, but it didn't impact what we were measuring here.
And then during your laboratory incubations, did you normalize moisture across all your sites, or across all your samples?
We used field moisture, what they were collected at. So okay. No, it wasn't normalized, but
cool. Yeah, super interesting.
How are we doing?
Still time for one more question. One more question.
I have another question, if that's okay. So, Brian, this last graph, higher net and mineralization in older soil, while at the same time those soils have a lower CO2 flux. So does that mean they just have a higher nitrogen pool to mineralize N from, or what's the mechanism behind that pattern?
So from what I can tell, it's mostly driven by the immobilization in the younger soils. Everything's really yummy and there's tons of microbial biomass.
Okay.
So there's less microbial biomass in the older soils, and those soils are working, or those microbes are working harder. So they're per unit biomass, they're putting out more nitrogen.
But not more CO2. Okay, that's an interesting pattern.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. Great. Okay, so our next talk is from Susan Connard. And after Susan, we will go back and try Victoria again. Susan is going to talk about the 2020 fire season in Siberia. Was it unprecedented?
Sorry about that.
Okay.
Little muting problem.
We can hear you.
Try this again. There, can you see the screen?
We can see you. We can't see
you can't hear me?
We can hear you, but we can't see your screen.
Okay, I tried to share it. Let's see. Share, how's that?
Yes, it's coming.
Yes,
we can see your screen.
Okay, excellent. Sorry about that. So a lot of you probably heard things in the news last summer about terrible fires all over Siberia. And at the end of the season, Yevgeny Ponomarev and I did a short article for Wildfire magazine to try to capture what had happened during that fire season. And that's basically what this shows. I think maybe I'll zoom in on it a little bit, if that'll work. So one of the basically the factors that sort of predisposed Siberia to this bad fire season last year were temperature and upper atmospheric circulation patterns. The first panel shows land surface temperature anomalies in spring, May to June 2020, and you can see that a lot of the areas up here were 4 to 5 to 6 degrees C above normal. And if you look over here at the second panel, the surface air temperatures in June, you can see here, were very high up in this area and somewhat in central Siberia, but lower in these other areas. And part of that was caused by upper atmospheric circulation patterns. You can see there's a very strong low here over the western part of Siberia and a high over the eastern part, and that's basically what drove the spatial patterns of the fires last summer. And this map, which I think you can all see, shows the burned areas for the summer of 2020, and you can see that the highest burned areas are all in this region, and that area where there was a big low pressure, there was pretty much no fire. A lot of the discussion in the news centered around northern fires. So one of the things that we did was look at fires by latitude. And this first graph shows distribution. Just look at the burned area, which is red, by latitude. You can see that even above 65 degrees north, which is approximately the Arctic Circle, about 26% of the burned area was there, but it was pretty well distributed across latitude, so it wasn't all happening in the northern part of Siberia. And then if you look seasonally at the burned area distribution, the fires basically start, these are the latitudinal bands shown there, so the fires basically start in March at the southern latitudes, so south of Siberia, and by April you're getting up to 60 degrees north, and it's not until you get into June and July that you really get a lot of fire in the far northern parts north of 65 to 70 degrees, and then that drops off very rapidly, and by the end of September the fire season was pretty well over, and what fires were occurring were in the more mid latitudes. So you can also look at the percent of the burned area in Russia that occurred north of 65 degrees, and there was a very high percentage in 2020 compared to a lot of years because it was about 25%. In 2001 it was 36%, so that was a lot higher, but 2001 was a much lower fire year, so it's a little bit misleading in some ways to look at that. In 2020, in total in Siberia, about 29 million hectares burned, and so that is actually a very, very high fire year for Siberia. One of the issues that comes up often is, were these fires caused by climate change? And the answer to that is, you can't say a definite yes, but it certainly is the kind of fire season that we expect to occur more frequently as the climate continues to warm. And there was a paper that was done recently that basically said it was highly unlikely to have this kind of fire season in the absence of warming climate. So there's more on this in our paper in Wildfire magazine, and I also urge everyone, if you want to know more about fires in Siberia last summer and actually over the past 20 years, we're having a panel on Siberian fires on Thursday that you might want to check in on. Thank you.
We have time for one question.
I have a question. Susan, you said at the beginning you talked about the abnormally high temperatures in Siberia. I guess, like, what is the typical range of maximum temperatures during the time period used? It was 2003 to 2018. How out of the ordinary are these highs?
Well, this is like the maximum was about 7 or 8 degrees above that baseline average? Is that the question you're asking?
Yeah, but I guess within the time
It
range
was,
that you use to calculate that average, how much variability is there?
probably quite a bit. There's a tremendous amount, and I don't show this here. I don't show this here, but there's a tremendous variability from year to year in Russia in what happens with individual fire seasons, and a lot of it's driven by atmospheric anomalies, so that you get these patterns of atmospheric wave patterns and get big blocking highs. And if you have a blocking high, you'll get these very high temperatures, and often a big fire outbreak. And if you don't, you won't. So the fire seasons range from, maybe 5 million hectares a year to 30 million hectares a year for Siberia. It's quite variable from year to year.